All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again. Your host here, Eric Kavanagh. I'm excited to have two of the smartest people I know on the call today. Quick tease for our new TV show. Check your local listings for Future Proof, the world's first made-for-TV webinar series, now in 6 markets around the country. Lots of cool stuff about data and enterprise technology. Let's move ahead. A stitch in time, the power of a data quality fabric. Folks will be talking to Ataccama today and my longtime friend from Data Millennium. So we'll hear from Marek Ovcacek. He is of Ataccama, one of the coolest companies I've seen in the data space in quite some time. They're focused on self-driving data. And they're going to talk today about this concept of a data quality fabric. And of course, my buddy Malcolm Chisholm dialing in from Data Millennium. We were just talking, we've known each other for about 14 years now, or 13 years, for quite some time. And a lot has changed, but a lot is still the same. The principles are still the same. So let's just talk real quick. I was trying to think of a good metaphor to dive into data quality and why it matters. And for those of you who haven't seen it, there's a very strange movie by the Monty Python guys called Brazil. And in the early part of the movie, there's some procedure where the form is being filled out, it's being sent out, and there's a mistake. Is it Tuttle? Is it Buttle? And all sorts of mayhem results because of one small issue in a data quality problem. And that got me thinking, one of the most frustrating parts of data quality from my perspective is when you overwrite good data with bad. Let's say you had the good data, you had the golden record, but some new person comes in, decides, no, we're going to do this data quality project. And guess what? They overwrite the good data with the bad data. That is a bad day in the world of data quality. And these days, of course, with so much data movement, it's a very serious issue we have to watch out for. Now, what I'm seeing in the marketplace that makes a lot of sense and is getting us very excited about things are some of these movements around self-driving data management, for example. That's something Ataccama talks about. And then, like I say, they have this concept of a data quality fabric. So you probably heard about data fabric. It's really emblematic of what's happening in the data space, that no longer is a single database going to be the cornerstone of your information strategy. Now you need a data fabric that can serve all sorts of different business needs and can handle what the database in and of itself is going to have difficulty doing. But what is this data quality fabric all about? Well, that's why we're on the call today with Marek. And Marek, with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to allow you to present your slides. And folks, don't be shy. Send questions in at any time. You can text it to us. You can use the Q&A component. You could even tweet to me. And with that, Marek, go ahead and share your screen, and we'll take it away.
All right. Hello, everybody. Hopefully, everybody can see my screen by now.
Yep. That's good.
Today, I'm going to be talking about Enterprise Data Quality Fabric, what it is about, and why we in Ataccama think it is important to integrate data quality natively in your organization's data fabric. Now, I will first try to explain some basics of data fabric and to do some kind of a little bit of recap and how data governance processes work in this new paradigm. Why I recommend to include data quality in this solution and where data quality fits in it. Now, although I work for Ataccama, this is not a marketing demo. The concepts I'm going to discuss should be helpful for any tooling you want to use to build your data fabric. And of course, I recommend using Ataccama tech stack for this, but ultimately, if you have other suitable tools that you can use to build similar solution, you will be able to do it. Maybe it will not be so well integrated, but just from the basic principles of data fabric, you should be able to do it anyway. Now I'm going to start with a question, right? So, what is data fabric? Now, in Ataccama, what we are doing is that by providing a shared multi-purpose data governance and data management layer, we are making organizations' data and metadata instantly available for business processes and products at the speed, quality, and form required by the consuming process and or product. Oh, I know this is a mouthful, so let's unpack it a little bit and start focusing on the important part of this. Now, the data fabric itself is this shared multi-purpose data management and governance layer. And what we are adding to it is that the purpose of this layer is to provide data in a speed, quality, and form required by the consumer processes. And this is actually the most important part. This is the part that distinguishes data fabric from other solutions, such as your intelligent data marketplace or other advanced data governance systems. Now, if you imagine from a perspective of data governance, this layer is sitting between your data sources and data consumers, and is actually activated by the user or process requesting the data. So activation actually is here at the end of the process, and when this this use case activated data at the data governance layer then provides data for a specific use case. It can be your master data management. It can be your DQ reporting. It can be data export to train your AI model. Now, important thing here is that mostly you want your data governance layer to understand that end use case, to be able to determine what kind of data it can provide. Now, in a traditional approach is non-data fabric. You know this from your organizations already, right? So in a traditional approach, this requires organization to go through the formalized process that require usually participation of multiple departments and expert users. So these projects are mostly the same on principle and go through some of the process. So like, let's imagine you need to request data. You want to start your master data management project. So you first need to fill in the requested data, get approval, get funding, create project specification, find where the data are, identify the people who are owning the data, and so on, so on and so forth. Now, this project usually goes through the kind of a same template, and follow similar processes needed to cater to the proper corporate governance, and it's usually dictated by availability of the skilled users for each part of the process. The decision framework for this process usually is consisted of expert users using metadata. So this metadata can be your DDLs, your models, your documents, descriptions of your data set, manual exploration, and somebody goes to the database and start running some statistics on top of it, and so on. And usually these metadata are scattered through multiple verticals and not in the same place. So it used to be even that a lot of this information was just living inside somebody's head. Like to get proper data extract from some system, you need John from accounting to send you the SQLs that he's using for the last 10 years. Now, if you are very, very lucky, the part of this decision framework is also data quality metrics. So basically just some basic data quality evaluation about your data sources. And if you are extremely lucky, then as part of this approach where you are getting the data, you also are getting properly formatted and clean data out. Now, this is by no means a standard. Even now, in the very mature organizations, sometimes you go across the projects that fail because they just forgot to include this in their data governance provisioning process. Now, in the data fabric approach, the layer itself has all the functionalities you need built in, and can use and implement them as they are needed based on the end use case. So in this case, the machine actually understands part of the request, understands the reason that the user or process needs the data, and it actually uses decision framework that is consisting of centralized metadata layer and AI models that are operating on top of this centralized metadata layer that basically first create data pipelines inside of the data governance layer, and secondly, learn from the user interactions. These user interactions mostly are the expert users who either confirm or reject the choices made by the models, or even provide their own override. Now, this centralized metadata layer, what is different about this is that all the metadata in it are in a machine and user readable state, and are basically in a common format and understandable. Instead of having all this metadata in the different verticals, we are just building these as a kind of a source of your knowledge. Now, using this, the data governance layer can then decide on its own how to construct the data pipeline, right? Since the solution has the metadata available and expert processes and models built around it, it can assess the end use case that activates it and provide the data by dynamically constructing the data pipeline. And for different use cases, or even different timings of the same use case, it can change basically the way that it provides the data. It may skip some processes. It may add additional processes. Let's say if the data quality is evaluated as sufficiently good, it may skip the enrichment process. If it's not good, then it will start pulling some additional reference data to enrich what you already have. Or in some extreme cases, it can even decide to switch to a completely different source if the source is available. Let's say you have multi-layer data warehouse. If the same data are available in different layers, and some of the layers have better latency, you may be able to provide the data more efficiently. Now, even inside of these small processes, the specific steps of the process, the layer can configure them differently. So let's say based on the data structure and logical domains in the data, the data quality assessment may use a different rules to assess the data quality of your data, and then based on the result of that, it may again use the different cleansing and enrichment subroutines to provide you the best version of the data. Now, what is important here, at the same time, you should have a system where the users can override any of these parts and review what is happening. This should not be a black box. You get the source of the data, you get the result, and you don't know what's happening in between. It should also always be available for expert users to go on and reconfigure that process. Now, the end goal here is to basically to remove obstacles and streamline the otherwise complicated process of data providing to the users and consuming systems. So the data are actually used, and users can use the data when they need it, instead of spending majority of the time of their time in basic project management. Now, I would like to answer the following question. Why would you consider integrating data quality, or why should you consider integrating data quality to your data fabric architecture? Now, the concept of data fabric in itself is new, but the data integration pipelines that the governance layer creates as a result of metadata-driven decision-making are not new, right? It usually creates something that resembles your existing, outcome of your, traditional process, right? So it can be something like this, something like that, but usually it's something that resembles your process. So, for example, if you look at the example that data governance layer can create, it's something close to your basic MDM staging, right? You need your use case is that you need the best possible information about the customer from multiple sources. So your data governance layer, based on available metadata, should determine that it needs to do this classic load, matching, merging, and providing multi-step process that you usually use when you are building the data integration hub. Now, this is something that you've probably seen in the MDN projects in your organizations, should you have any. And we as Ataccama, we are actually doing this as right now as a separate enterprise-ready tool, but slowly moving it to be more integrated to the data fabric. So our data governance layer can actually construct that automatically. Now, just because we are doing it, we actually have some expertise in it. And since we are delivering it for better part of the decade now to our customers, we slowly built in multiple additional kind of steps in that process. Most notably, this step we built in cleansing standardization process and aggregation between the matching and merging, and corresponding layers around it. Now, again, this is metadata-driven approach. These different processes can reconfigure itself, but this still doesn't have the kind of a data governance layer automatically creating this whole process. But in general, this is where the data governance layers in the data fabric are coming to. Now, if you look at it for specifically for the around the cleansing and DQ layer, in this layer, what we are doing is that we are running data quality evaluation and standardization. This is our recommended pattern that we are providing to our customers. This is how most of our customers are actually implementing our MDM. They have this data standardization layer is built into the logical transaction of the outline. Edge cases are covered by it, and so on and so forth. Now, what happens in this layer is that that data are first evaluated, basically creating the score for a data, which is later very important for matching and merging. It can be additional basically metadata inferred from the existing data that you can use there. And then you create, we are also creating a standardized version of the data. Let's say you have a date from multiple systems, you standardize the format. You have addresses from multiple systems, you enrich and identify those addresses to make sure that they actually exist. Or you have some identifying information and you put them in the same format. Now, over the years, we were able to run this on the countless different customer installations, and from big and small, from the sizes of hundreds of thousands of records to the humongous sizes that goes to the terabyte scale of data, and multinational bank houses running this solution. What we discovered is that simply adding the data standardization layer to this process actually results in the multiple benefits for the business and IT. And it can be actually quantified. For the business, you can get as much as 40% higher accuracy for your output data. This means better match, less manual overrides, more accurate reporting, higher conversion ratios, and less post-processing needed for a data. At the same time, for IT, you can actually have up to 60% better processing performance, be it a faster processing or using less hardware for the same amount of processing. Notably, MDM is kind of an extreme case of this, where your matching process and merging process is actually very computationally intensive. So basically, removing as many edge cases as possible by first running data quality allows you to completely change the kind of how the process is scaling up to the point where you can actually run real-time updates and run these processes on top of your streaming or micro-batch architecture as well. This whole kind of MDM process. And this actually is in a lot of the cases enabled by the data quality. Like imagine these edge cases, like Eric mentioned, the tunnel versus battle, right? You need to match these together, right? And modern system can do it. Our system can do it as well, right? You applied some string functions on it, something like edit distance or Levenstein, or something like that, and it will match them together with lower accuracy, but match them together. But it also requires much more computational, spaces. But you can actually, in a lot of the cases, you can actually, do something in pre-processing. Let's say create a list of synonyms, or create a pre-computed list of this, and then skip that step altogether, because suddenly, instead of going through the edge case where you match them, with less accuracy, you just match them one-to-one. Now, and the MDM in this case is just one example. In general, what we do in Ataccama in all of our kind of products or projects that we are delivering, we are trying to, include data quality as an integrated part of that process. And in majority of the process that we are delivering, which is basically the data pipelines that you have in your data governance layers, the data quality has very similar impact on the end case. Maybe more familiar, something that you may be more familiar with is like nowadays we are very often creating the exports of the data for your AI models, right? And you are familiar with the classic phenomenon of garbage in and garbage out, right? And this is, you know, obviously if you have better quality data and you can pre-process and enrich data before running them to the AI model, you can save a lot of computational time and resources. Now, let's see where if we know this and we want to basically include the data quality in the data fabric design, where do we include the data quality? Right. So you may have noticed that in a data governance layer example previously, I already have had some data quality related processes included in the what I call data path or data integration pipeline. Right. This is because we believe that we need to include them in the majority of the operations, because they are important for the majority of the use cases that you would want to do with the data if you are building such a data governance layer. And that's why we built our data governance layer to be able to do most of these automatically. And we use, let's say in this example, we use data profiling to run some statistics on top of the data and compute some data quality related statistics. Then we use them to run data quality assessment. Basically, just basically infer additional metadata, save that metadata to the centralized metadata layer. Based on that, on top of that, you can run anomaly detection on the results of the statistics. Again, enhance your metadata, infer additional metadata. And then when you're finally providing the data, again, based on the metadata you saved in the centralized layer, you can provide metadata with the proper format and enriched and standardized and cleansed to your to your consumers and end processes. Now, for those of you that are familiar with a kind of a more formalized definition of the different layer and processes in your enterprise data fabric, this may look very familiar at this point, right? Like if you look at the data fabric from a more formalized way, you have this kind of a 6-layer or processes that you are do with the data and metadata throughout your data fabric. Split on 2 layers, knowledge graph and agreement data catalog is, you know, your metadata kind of a storage and presentation layer. Then your metadata activation and recommendation engine is what is creating inferred additional metadata on top of that, and again store it back to the previous layers. And then your data preparation and delivery part is creating a data pipelines based on that metadata information. And finally, orchestration and data ops is providing, is running these data pipeline and providing you with the data. Now, from the purely data quality, we are mapping our data quality processes to a couple of these layers thusly, right? So mainly for metadata activation, data monitoring and reporting, and data profiling. What does it do? Like data profiling provides you with the statistics. Statistics about your data sets are nothing more than additional metadata. It basically infer additional metadata on top of your existing metadata, and in this case, data. Data monitoring reporting, again, it produces data quality scores, it produces data quality kind of evaluation. Again, that's nothing more than additional metadata. And you can use that in your recommendation engines, which in our case we call AI Core, where we run things like anomaly detection. Anomaly detection, usually we run it on top of the statistics through multiple runs of the data, and try to detect where something looks what we call weird, right? And again, it produces additional metadata. And then lastly, in the data preparation and data delivery layer, we are using this additional metadata to basically automatically provide data standardization and enrichment to the end consumers. Now, as a note here, data quality is not the only thing we do in the data fabric. We believe in Ataccama that for you to be able to successfully and effectively implement data fabric in your organization, you need a wide range of capabilities and technical components to be able to support the whole range of functionalities that your architecture require. These are ranging from the additional DQ capabilities, but also you have data integration and provisioning, reference data management, MDM, and it needs to be supported by a robust layer of technical components that will allow you for more efficient processing and custom integration with the rest of your technology stack. And of course, if you look at them, all of these components that I'm talking about basically map very well to that formal definition of your data fabric. Now, again, you can just use data quality part of it, or you can use multiple components as well. Now, data fabric is not only about the data quality, right? So we believe that data quality should be integrated in it, but you need a lot of other components to be able to effectively activate your data fabric architecture. Good news for you is that you probably already have a lot of them in your technology stack, in your organization right now. And going forward, you should be looking for the tools and parts of this process that can integrate with your existing landscape and with other processes. Each of these components should be interchangeable and reconfigurable. Data fabric concept actually specifies interoperability as one of the main characteristics, right? So if you are deciding whether you want to buy, huge monolithic technology stack that does all of this for you, or multiple smaller pieces, you have multiple choices there, right? In Ataccama, this is not an exception, right? Each part of these can be used on its own, or it can be used as a part of the larger solution. So you can use, let's say, data quality integration as part of your wider solution, or as part of our technology stack with the multiple different layers provided by Ataccama. Depends on what you need. But again, I'm talking about Ataccama. If you have some other pieces in your organization that do data quality, ideally, if they are metadata driven, then you can automate them. You should include them in your data fabric architecture and make it a data quality fabric. All right, so I think I'm right on time here. Thank you for your attention here. Again, obviously for more information, also news, white papers, and for further webinars and conferences, please visit ataccama.com or plan the demo, or ask us about further details. Just let us know, right? Yeah, go ahead.
We have a couple good questions already from the audience, so we'll queue those up. For the Q&A, don't be shy, folks. Send your questions in now. And with that, let's hand it off to Malcolm Chisholm of Data Millennium. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Eric, and thank you, Marek, for that very insightful presentation. I wanted to take a little bit of what you say and amplify it somewhat for about 5 minutes, and then we can get into more of a discussion about your material, Marek. But it was like thinking that metadata underlies or overlays the data fabric. I think it's very, very important for us to think a bit more deeply about metadata than may have been traditional in the spaces that we work in. So I think the first question is, what is metadata? And the typical answer has been, it's data about data. Well, that's not a very helpful definition, especially if you look at the richness of what Marek has just been showing us. There's a lot of different aspects to that. It's not really just data about data. So if we're going to have a data fabric that is sort of driven by this centralized metadata repository, what is that? And I have a proposed definition, which is that metadata is the data that describes all aspects of an enterprise's information assets and enables the enterprise to effectively use and manage these assets, both use and manage. And I don't think it's necessarily a new concept. Dr. Samuel Johnson, who wrote the first commonly used English dictionary back in the 18th century, said knowledge is of two kinds. We know a subject ourselves, or we know where we can find information upon it. So I think, metadata has kind of been lurking out there for a long time, and it's important for us to think a little bit more clearly about it, particularly so that we can apply and sort of master what we need to for the data fabric. And I think one of the steps in that is to think about metadata in terms of a subject area approach. What are all the different kinds of metadata that we need in our particular enterprise to manage? And again, I think Marek has implied a number of these these subject areas of metadata in what he was just showing us. This is an attempt I made a few years back to sort of think about what might be the super subject areas, and the smaller boxes are the subject areas. Like in data models, we have conceptual, canonical, taxonomies, and the little white labels within that are the most important metadata entities that you would deal with. So I think it's very important if we can think about our metadata in this sort of subject area approach. Why? Because it will enable us to then think about a federated metadata architecture. And again, that corresponds with what Marek was talking about in terms of the data fabric, where maybe you do have a monolithic solution for your data fabric, in which case probably it's going to be a little bit more easy. But then on the other hand, more likely you're going to have different tools, and you'd want to say, okay, what metadata tool is doing what with which particular metadata subject areas, and the diagram that you generate, presumably something like this, would help you to do that. So I think that's kind of a responsibility of data governance to come up with that. And you can also prioritize different metadata areas. And I think I think this is particularly important because, for a long time we've thought about metadata as maybe, it's like just documentation. And we're seeing a switch now to where we have forward metadata engineering, where metadata is driving processes, and also the AI or machine learning components that, again, Marek's referred to, mean that metadata itself has to be sort of clearly understood, because some kind of processes, AI or ML processes, are going to operate on it, so we need to understand it. And I think, maybe one way to think, or one good example of that, is that we can have the more static metadata, which describes structure, and the more dynamic metadata, which is telling us how our processes are operating. So you could imagine that you have a sort of roadmap for a particular data pipeline that could be enabled at any one time. But the operation of that data pipeline, the iterations of the operation of it might be stored as more sort of logging type metadata, and that's a different kind. So again, you can see how you need these different kinds of metadata, and rather than think of metadata as a sort of undifferentiated, homogeneous blob of stuff, it's going to be more important to think about the different kinds of metadata. And realistically, metadata is very rich and diverse, maybe infinitely so. So we need to have a good handle on it. So I'd really recommend thinking about metadata in terms of driving it at least to a subject area level for your data fabric. And then you can also categorize what you're doing with it in terms of the different use cases that it kind of applies to. So, some of those components and services in the data fabric are going to be driven by certain subject areas of metadata. So understanding that, enables us to link the metadata to the processes themselves, to the services and components rather. And that's going to give us, make us much easier to sort of operate the architecture of the data fabric and be successful with it. So I think I'm about out of time, but that was kind of my plea, as it were, for if you're going to work with the data fabric, think very carefully about metadata. Try to not think of it as just an individual sort of unit of some sort of information, but look at it in terms of its different types and manage those according to their needs. So with that, I will stop presenting, and I will, I think, hand it back to Eric for starting the discussion.
Yeah, we can dive right in. And if you have a good architectural slide, Marek, that you want to share while we talk about this, that's great. No worries if not. But we got a bunch of good questions coming from the audience. There's one, and I just like to throw out some history. So I remember we're talking 14, 15 years ago when I was fairly new in this industry, talking about metadata repositories. And I had the distinct thought in my head, and I asked a guy who ran a company called Qualiware. I asked him, well, it doesn't really make sense to have lots of different metadata repositories. Don't you want to have one that you share across different departments and across different organizations, et cetera? Like if it's standardized, that makes a whole lot of sense because then you can kind of swap and you can reconcile, et cetera. And he kind of laughed about that, but there's an audience question in the queue here. I'll throw it over to Marek first, and then Malcolm, feel free to chime in on this. Someone writes, where was it? Hold on. Years ago, I recall years ago, Gartner rejected the viability of a single metadata repository, hub storage, and recommended customers focus on subject areas. Are we saying that we've now matured and can handle it all in one place? And is there an industry standard model for that? Which is kind of what I was talking about years ago. But Marek, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I wish there was an industry standard model for that. Or some kind of standardized, metadata exchange format at least, but they are not, right? And it's Gartner is not saying, or analysis firms are not saying that that suddenly we are going to the centralized metadata layer. Centralized metadata layer doesn't have to be one solution. It can be multiple solutions. It can be, multiple solutions interconnected. For example, a lot of the times where we operate in the organizations where they have, where they have, let's say, Colibra as their metadata management tool, and they have Ataccama metadata management and catalog alongside with it, right? Now, the important thing is that what the data fabric adds to that definition is that these solutions needs to be able to, exchange the information and integrate together. Now, not all these solutions are able to do it, right? There are metadata management solution there with such integrated APIs that it's not possible. Now, this is actually opening the whole other topic of discussion, how you integrate them in the absence of any kind of standards, right? Just a short answer there is actually start looking at the very capable data integration and sort of almost ETL tools that you can actually use to integrate your metadata. And why I'm mentioning is this because we are currently on the projects, we are very often using actually Ataccama integration capabilities that were originally designed to integrate data to actually integrate metadata between multiple metadata management solutions, which if you have like something that is generic enough that can, manage these different formats and put them together, it's nothing different than, your data integration project, but for metadata.
That makes Malcolm, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think, you're inevitably going to end up with a federated metadata architecture because the meta, I mean, it's difficult even to get to that kind of diagram I showed of the subject areas. To go down to a whole prescriptive industry standard model at the sort of attribute level, I think is just asking too much. And metadata is potentially infinite. New classes of metadata arise all the time. I mean, think of the, things like URLs, they're a type of metadata. They didn't exist before the internet. So you can see how more and more metadata is being generated. So, or more and more types of metadata are being generated. So I think you're going to have to do what Marek said, find ways to integrate metadata for your needs. It does depend on the APIs. It also, unfortunately, depends on the idiosyncrasies of the tools themselves that are managing the classes of metadata that they do manage, how they're doing that, because that can affect the way, you know, the shape of the metadata coming out of them. So I think there's a lot of challenges there. But again, I don't think we don't need to, as it were, integrate all metadata. It's only the stuff that's necessary for the data fabric. And another huge advantage of metadata that I found in my professional career is forward metadata engineering, where you're using metadata to do things that would in the past have been done by handcrafted programmer code. So that's really a massive advantage of using metadata.
Yeah, so the way I use it exactly this last point is that when you are on the project, you are basically like traditionally you as a consultant or you as a data person, you are basically like getting all that metadata, and based on that you are making decision and creating these things. The way I look at it is that I'm basically trying to automate my work. What I'm doing on all of these projects, I'm using that knowledge to build myself as a model that can use that metadata, right? Yeah, and yeah, that's it. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. We got a bunch of really good questions here. So let me just start throwing some of these over to you, gentlemen. So Marek, here's one for you about policies and policy constraints and how they impact the ability to automate metadata-driven data quality standardization. So pipeline creation, execution, et cetera. And you made a couple really interesting points earlier. I'd like you to kind of dive into a bit. You talked about performance and how much it takes to actually execute some of these rules, depending upon where they are in the architecture. And that's what we're talking about, right? The fabric is, you're really talking about an architecture, and at different points in the stack, you're going to apply rules to, you talked about pre-processing, for example, you talked about being able to prepare for issues like Buddle and Tuttle, for example. Can you talk about policy constraints, how to design these things, and dive into some more detail on the cost, whether it's performance or speed or whatever the case may be? Could you dive into that, Marek?
Yeah, certainly. This is actually very close to my heart because we are actually currently working on addressing this specific issue, and we already have some prototypes to work with it. Now, what I recommend, how to deal with policies and policy constraint when you are using automated system like it, is consider your policies as part of your, basically centralized metadata layer, right? You need to be able to define those policies or, kind of import and transform those policies in a way that your models and your metadata layer can understand them. Now, the way that we are usually, or right now we are approaching this, is that we define policies as they are mapped not to the data, but to actually kind of a description of the data. If you imagine your data layer is, let's say, very high level data catalog, which has data assets, and it has logical descriptions connected to the data assets. Let's say, here is email, here is, a gender information, here is, phone number information, SIN information, stuff like that. Then you should tie your policies not to the data itself, but to that basically description of the domain, right? You type policies, for example, certain people from an organization can or cannot access PII data. Then you have PII data mapped automatically, preferably to the description of PII data mapped preferably automatically to your data assets. And then based on that, when you have that information in your centralized metadata, then automated process can actually go on. And when you are activated that data governance layer, it can use that information to basically filter out the data or access that you should not have, or give you the data or access that you should have. What is important here is realization that you should tie those policies to the metadata descriptions, not to the data itself, because the way that that then descriptions are mapped to the data basically creates this kind of a path from your data to the policies. And this is kind of one of the importance of, let's say, Gartner is giving a lot of the weight in your metadata layer to the what they call knowledge graph. Knowledge graph is exactly this. It ties, your data to the, let's say, description or policy to the multiple hops in that layer. But your AI model should be able to evaluate that. Now, performance-wise, and this is why it's not out yet, let's say in Ataccama or any other software, is that this is not you can imagine it's not an easy computational kind of a problem, right? Because to be able to do this, you need to have kind of a computational ability to run generic data processing on any of your connected sources, right? And by saying generic, like, let's say the same way I'm applying the policies on the data from a database, I should be able to apply the same policies on the data, let's say from a CSV file or from a Parquet file or from your, Hive tables. Now, all of these, work differently. So if you have policies that only can apply through the, modifying your and injecting your SQL, it's not going to work per organization. Only where it works in a way that your organization will be able to accept it is it works for everything. And if you have generic data processing, it will come at a cost of less performance, right? Like, because native data processing, when you are running it at the source, will of course be more performant. Now, the way we are addressing it, and we are hoping that this is going to be working correctly, is to move that processing to the edge as close to the data as possible, and having system automatically kind of determine where they can run it. Now, the good thing about this is that usually you can pre-compute it, and if you keep your metadata automatically, synchronized with your source, it will just stay in check. It will just need to recompute when the metadata change. This is why the centralized metadata layer is important, because then you can have all this information in one place and recompute only when you need it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, as I'm looking at this and looking at the architecture and hearing you describe the processes here, what I find exciting is that you're giving visibility across the organization into the workflows, essentially, and then people on the front lines who know the data or the processes best can make their adjustments, but that can all be monitored and managed and undone if someone makes a mistake, for example. Is that about right, Marek?
Yes. So right now, not really undone, but at least you have some kind of audit that is important. And once you have this, centralized, you have, of course, audit over everything, right? So that is the important part for now. Undo is not that easy. Once you hit the original data, you don't want actually your data governance layer just having right access to all your sources. So that is much more complicated process.
Right. Can't use Control Z on that one, right?
Yeah.
There's a good question from the audience here. What about adding new sources? So the question is, can Marek discuss how easy it is to connect sources through APIs? What is the approach? How long does it typically take to add a new source? Can you talk about that?
Yes. So you have multiple ways of adding source. Well, one is a standardized approach, right? A lot of your sources, your relational databases usually have, something like JDBC standard. Once you have that layer written, you can basically apply it to any, JDBC enabled data source, which is virtually any relational database out there or its variants, right? Then you have your, as you mentioned, your APIs. Now that there is much, there's a little bit more difficult, but not impossible. The way that we are approaching this is that we are using actually the data integration layer that is constructing these data pipelines, and we are giving the expert users ability to create their own pipeline. And basically what we are telling them is create the first part of that pipeline. It's basically connecting to API, parsing the data to some common format, and then let the rest of the data governance process take over, right? Now, we are doing it in a way that that first part, that connecting to the API, after you first write it, and then it becomes reusable part of the process. So let's say, it will take you a couple of days to first write it, but then you can reuse it over and over again for any other API with the same characteristics. Now, this is because we are kind of looking at the generic APIs. If you look at something like REST or SOAP APIs, there is literally like no rules, right? It can have any format. So that's why at this moment you actually need a user interaction. If you look at something more sophisticated, like GraphQL API or something like that, that comes with its own schema, in that case, we are actually working on having that built in, and that should be something that doesn't require additional integration in the future.
Okay, good. A lot of great questions coming in here, folks. We'll try to get to all these. We got about 9 minutes left or so. Here's an obvious question I'll throw to Marek. There are quite a few companies talking about data fabric these days. Talent is listed in the Magic Quadrant last I checked as a leader. There are a bunch of other companies that are doing different pieces and parts. But from my perspective, and we've seen all the time how terms get used by other organizations to describe slightly different things. From my perspective, the company's talking about data fabric, there are all kinds of different ways that you can describe what you're doing. And to use the term data fabric is, it's getting a bit challenging to understand exactly what that means. But can you, as much as you can you differentiate what you mean by data fabric from what some of these other vendors are talking about?
Yeah. So firstly, yes, of course. Firstly, there is no magic quadrant for data fabric, and it's probably never going to be. And the reason for that is that data fabric is not a description of the tool. It's a description of the solution architecture. Mm-hmm. Right. So there is a data fabric basically means that you have some solution architecture. You recommend people using that solution architecture, and you are putting some constraints on the solution architecture inside. That's what Gartner actually defines. And then you basically look at your tool, you look at your existing capabilities, and decide whether you can put those existing capabilities together in a way that actually implement the solution architecture. So if you look at the Talent or Informatica, the same as Ataccama, they have a lot of different tooling available. And they are saying now, okay, they looked at the, let's say, Gartner definition of data fabric, and they say, okay, our tooling is mapped to this definition this way, is implementing the solution architecture this way. This is how we are recommending using it, and they start adding multiple different things to it. For us in Ataccama, this was actually very easy because after the Gartner started formalizing data fabric as a solution architecture, we looked at other solution architectures of our existing products and the way that we are thinking about this metadata driven approach, and it was 80 or 90% match. Basically, we just slapped the data fabric label on top of that, add our own things on it, but we have a lot of experience because this is how we actually recommend people using our products or in general doing data governance for at least 8 or 10 years now. So
yeah,
it's not very new for us.
Well, it seems to me, so data governance is the other fun thing, and I'll bring Malcolm in here to comment on it again, because I've long thought to myself, you can't have true data governance unless you have some sort of management layer that touches darn near every significant piece of data processing technology that you own. And that's a very difficult thing to do. So these data catalogs came along that you mentioned a couple times, Marek, which are very useful for starting to understand what's really out there. Because I think, until then, we didn't really understand everything that was out there. We just kind of made do with what we had. But now you can actually do real data governance. But it seems to me the best way to do that is through some sort of a fabric type approach. Because again, then you have various touch points across that fabric to the different systems that are impacted or should be impacted, I should say, from a data governance perspective. So I think we're getting there. Malcolm, could you comment on that from your perspective? You've been talking about this stuff for years. I feel like we've really turned a corner on data governance, in large part due to this concept of a data fabric, and now what Marek is describing as a data quality fabric. But what do you think, Malcolm?
You're right, Eric. I think it's different. I mean, there's been, again, back in the day, metadata was like passive post facto documentation, kind of, okay, we have to do it, it's boring. But you see here, well, not for all of us, I should say. Some of us live, eat, breathe metadata, we love it. But you see here how metadata is being used in active data processing, active data management, active data governance. And I think that's the key differentiator. So I think we've turned that corner in terms of people understanding that what the data fabric can do for us. One particular thing I love about the data fabric approach is I personally hate projects, and I don't like the project way of thinking. And in one of Marek's earlier slides, he was kind of showing that. And I think one of the things that wasn't in that slide, Marek, was like the prioritization. Yeah, okay, thanks for defining your project. You're number 472 on our list. Maybe we'll get to it in 5 years' time. And that's just not good enough for today's enterprises. The data quality fabric makes it essentially projectless. Even if you did have a project put up, you'd go into all of the project sort of, you get bogged down in the project bureaucracy, like, okay, give us your user stories, give us these types of artifacts which really don't fit data sort of requests. But the data fabric is going to solve all of that because you've got an approach which can just deliver it. And also, an interesting thing about this is it's kind of self-documenting. You want to know how the data flows? The data, and you can see that again from Marek's earlier slides, could be this way, could be that way, but you're going to see it rather than have to have legions of business analysts swarm over it at some much later date to try and document the data flows. You've got it. That answers a lot of regulatory questions too. So there's enormous benefits in this from this sort of forward metadata engineering approach that you would not otherwise have seen until now.
That's
a really good point. Marek, do you want to comment on that?
Well, yeah. So firstly, a difference between doing a data governance project in an organization that has metadata management and doesn't have metadata management is huge. If you ever experience it, it's really huge. Now, secondly, I just want to add that what Malcolm is describing is very common, and it's not easy to switch thinking in an organization suddenly to use different way. So what we see a lot of the times is they start going halfway there in the sandboxing. So let's say you use something resembling data fabric to do a proof of concept of your project, get the data fast, get the statistics fast, see how it works. And then when you go to your formalized process and the prioritization Malcolm is describing, you come at it from the perspective, okay, so if you do this, this is the benefits. I already measured the benefits that I will probably get, and it will get you higher to the prioritization list, right? So doing that also starting from a sandboxing perspective would be probably more approachable to a lot of the bigger organizations out there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we have one real doozy of a question. I think I know the answer to it. There are actually two that are very similar. So I'll throw it over to Marek. An attendee is asking, how do the automated policies work with applications? Would applications get data based on the policies, or do the policies actually apply within the applications? I'm pretty sure it's the former. And another attendee asks, how do you see data fabric interacting with enterprise ERP systems like SAP? Can you talk about that real quick?
Yes. So I'm going to start with the policies. That the goal here is that applications should get data after the policies are already applied, right? That allows you to have like central point where you can trust that nothing will get the data it should not be getting, right? That's important there. Now the challenge there is, of course, not breaking the application when applying the policy changes the structure of your data. And usually, that's not an easy problem. Usually to be safe, you just keep the structure, but you, instead of removing the data, you can start masking the data. You can have a policies that's saying, nobody can see identifying information, but instead of providing it as a blank or removing it from the source altogether, just mask it when you are providing it to the application. Now, it doesn't solve everything, but it's on the good way there. And now this is actually tied, as you mentioned, interacting with ERP systems like SAP. Your metadata management or centralized metadata management layer needs to understand these systems to be able to kind of load metadata from them. And SAP is a very good example. Like loading metadata from the physical models of SAP is a nightmare. That's not gonna work, right? You need something that actually understands that, and there is no silver bullet here. You just need a system that has connector built in, but not just like physical connector, but the connector that actually understands the underlying metadata model of those ERP systems. And a part of the metadata model is actually policies applied in that ERP system. And then you need to parse them and put it into your centralized metadata. Now, it's gonna be a hard work. It's not easy. What is important, only thing that you can do to be future-proof in this case is to have metadata management system that you can extend yourself. Let's say if you have metadata management or your catalog, you should be able to extend underlying meta model of that to make space for additional kind of types of metadata you can load from multiple ERP system. So when those connectors arrive, you can be sure you can put them to the correct places.
Wow, that's fantastic insight, folks. We have so many questions here. We'll be sure to pass them on to our presenters today. We do archive all these webinars for later viewing. I think this is just fantastic stuff, folks. I think it's actually brilliant, quite frankly. But hop online to Inside Analysis to check out anything that you may have missed. We'll have the archive up fairly shortly. And I think we're going to have Marek on DM Radio sometime in the near future as well. So watch out for that. Big thanks to Ataccama for allowing us to bring you this content free of charge. And of course, to my buddy, Malcolm Chisholm. This does conclude our webinar. Thank you so much, folks. We look forward to talking to you next time. And as always, you can always email me, info@insideanalysis.com. We'll talk to you next time, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.